I don't know how long I sat there in that cabin, staring at the door. The fire had burned down to embers, barely casting any light in the room. My breath was slow, controlled, but my heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I thought it might give me away. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the thin window panes. It had been hours since I first heard it. The sound. I came up here to be alone. That was the whole point. A break from work, from people, from the constant pressure of life. Just a weekend in the woods, no distractions, no responsibilities. I'd rented the cabin off some listing site, a cheap little place nestled deep in the forest, miles away from anything. It was old, but it had everything I needed: a bed, a fireplace, even a little kitchen with a gas stove. The owner warned me about spotty cell service, but I didn't care. That was the idea. No phone, no emails, no noise. Just me and the wilderness. It was perfect at first. I spent the day hiking, taking in the crisp autumn air, the golden leaves crunching beneath my boots. The sun had been bright, cutting through the thinning trees, but by late afternoon, clouds had rolled in. I made it back to the cabin just as the first drops of rain started to fall. I didn't mind. I lit a fire, made a quick dinner, and settled into an old wooden chair with a book. The kind of evening I'd been looking forward to. And then I heard it, a soft crunch outside. I barely noticed it at first, just background noise in the wind and rain. But then it came again, closer, slow, deliberate steps. I put the book down and listened. The fire crackled beside me, my only source of light now that the sun was gone. Another step, then another. It wasn't an animal, too slow, too heavy. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe a bear, but I knew better. I reached for my phone out of instinct, even though I knew there was no signal. I checked anyway. Nothing. I switched on the flashlight and pointed it at the window. The beam barely made it past the glass, reflecting my own face more than anything else. I moved to the door, placing my ear against the wood, holding my breath. Silence. Then a single knock. Not loud, not urgent, just one solid tap against the wood. I felt a chill run through me, a tight grip of fear wrapping around my stomach. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe a hiker lost in the storm. Maybe the cabin owner checking in. But no one should be out here this late. No one knew I was here. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just stood there listening. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. My ears rang with the effort of trying to pick up the slightest sound. Then another step, and another, slowly moving away this time. I exhaled, barely realizing I had been holding my breath. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. I forced myself to move away from the door, back to my chair, back to the fire. But I didn't read. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, waiting, staring at the door. The wind outside picked up, the rain hitting the windows harder now. The fire crackled, casting shifting shadows along the wooden walls. My mind played tricks on me, seeing movement where there was none. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that there was nothing out there. But the feeling wouldn't go away, that deep, primal instinct. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I should have left right then. Grabbed my bag, got in the car, and driven back to town. But I stayed. I told myself I was overreacting, that leaving in the middle of the night on dark, wet roads was a worse idea than just waiting until morning. I shouldn't have stayed. Hours passed. The fire shrank to glowing embers. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember was waking up to complete darkness. The fire was dead, the room icy cold. And then I heard it again. A noise. Not a knock this time. A creak. Floorboards shifting under weight. Inside the cabin, I stopped breathing. My body went completely still, every muscle locked in place. The noise was so faint, but it was there. Slow. moving, closer. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers, the faint glow of the screen barely lighting up my lap. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I didn't want to see. I just wanted to know if the front door was still locked. Another creak. Closer now. My breath came out in short, silent bursts. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but I couldn't. And then it stopped. Silence. A long, suffocating silence. I counted the seconds in my head, waiting for the next noise, waiting for something to tell me where it was. But there was nothing, just the wind outside, the occasional rustle of trees. Had I imagined it? Was my own fear making me hear things? I forced myself to move, inching my hand toward the fire poker resting by the hearth. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal, gripping it tight. If something was in here, I wasn't gonna just sit and wait. I turned my phone's flashlight on and pointed it toward the kitchen. Empty. The small hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom was just a dark void. I swallowed hard and stood up, moving as quietly as I could. The floor groaned under my weight, and I froze. Then a breath. Right behind me, I spun around, swinging the poker, hitting nothing but air. The flashlight beam shook wildly in my hand, bouncing off the walls. I backed up toward the door, fumbling for the lock, my breath ragged. My fingers found the latch, yanked it open. Cold air and rain rushed in as I stumbled out onto the porch. I ran, barefoot, into the wet leaves, into the night. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't stop for my car. I just ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches cutting at my skin. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept going. I don't know how long I ran before I saw headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. A road, a car. I stumbled onto the pavement, waving my arms, screaming. The car skidded to a stop, and a man jumped out, startled, asking if I was okay. I could barely speak. I just pointed back toward the woods, toward the cabin. He called the cops. When they went back, they found the door wide open, the cabin empty, but they did find footprints inside. Large, muddy prints leading from the back door, stopping just behind the chair where I had been sitting. There was someone there, watching me, standing behind me in the dark. I never went back to get my things. I never even got back in my car. The cops took me to town and I left everything behind. I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted. But I know one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in that cabin. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to stay in the cabin alone. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe I just needed space. But looking back, I should have never gone. It started when my uncle offered me his old hunting cabin deep in the woods for a weekend getaway. I had been feeling burned out. Work, life, everything felt like it was suffocating me. The idea of spending a few days away from it all sounded like exactly what I needed. No cell service, no people, just me and nature. It was about a 5-hour drive from my place, secluded, surrounded by dense forest. He warned me it was a little run down, but it had everything I'd need. A bed, a wood stove, a generator, and a stocked pantry. I packed light, a few clothes, food, and my uncle's old rifle just in case. The drive up was peaceful at first. Roads turned to dirt paths, winding deeper into the trees. It was the kind of place where you don't see another car for miles. Just trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. The silence was heavy, pressing in, making me feel like I was the only person left in the world. I liked it at first. The cabin was exactly how my uncle described it, old, sturdy, but neglected. A single-story structure made of dark, weathered wood. A small porch out front. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of damp wood and dust, the air stale from months of being closed up. There was one main room with a bed against the wall, a small kitchen area, and a door leading to a bathroom with a rickety toilet and a tin shower. Everything was basic but functional. The first night was fine. I lit a fire in the stove, made some canned soup, and sat on the porch, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, branches rustling softly. I heard an owl somewhere in the distance, a few other unrecognizable noises, but nothing that made me uneasy. If anything, the solitude was calming. The next morning, I decided to explore a bit. I walked through the woods, rifle slung over my shoulder more out of habit than necessity. The forest was thick, but there were old hunting trails, mostly overgrown but still visible. I followed one for a while, taking in the quiet, breathing in the fresh, cold air. Then I found something strange. About a mile from the cabin, there was a clearing. In the center of it, an old fire pit, long abandoned. Around it, wooden poles stuck into the ground, maybe 8 or 9 of them, about waist high. They looked handmade, roughly cut, with something tied to the tops. Bundles of sticks wrapped together with what looked like old rope or twine. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Some kind of marker? An old campsite? It unsettled me, but I told myself it was nothing. Just something some hunters or campers had set up years ago. Still, I turned back after that. That night, something changed. I had just settled in for the night, the fire crackling low in the stove. I lay in bed, listening to the woods, the same sounds as the night before. But then I heard something new. Footsteps, soft, crunching through the leaves. Slow, deliberate, not an animal. Too steady, too controlled. My breath caught in my throat. I sat up, listening. The steps stopped. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. I told myself I was imagining it. The woods play tricks on your mind, especially when you're alone. Then, just as I was starting to calm down, a single knock, not on the door, on the wall of the cabin. I froze. My mind raced. Could have been a branch, maybe a falling pine cone. But it sounded deliberate, solid, like someone had tapped their knuckles against the wood. I grabbed the rifle, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited. Nothing else happened. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump. The wind, the creaks of the old wood, the distant hoot of an owl. I lay there, gripping the rifle, waiting for something else. But the knock never came again. The next morning, I checked around the cabin.
No footprints.
No signs that anyone had been there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been outside my cabin that night, standing just beyond the walls, watching. I thought about packing up and leaving, but I convinced myself I was overreacting. I was alone in the woods. Of course I'd feel uneasy. It was probably just my imagination. That day, I stayed close to the cabin, collecting wood, keeping the fire going. As the sun set, the feeling of unease grew. The woods felt different, heavier, like they were pressing in closer. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I forced myself to stay calm. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. The footsteps, closer this time, moving around the cabin. Then a soft, slow drag, like something being pulled through the leaves. I held my breath. My grip on the rifle tightened. My mind raced through possibilities. An animal, person, then a sound that made my skin crawl. The creak of the porch step. I stayed completely still. My eyes locked on the door. The fire flickered in the stove, casting shifting shadows along the walls. I felt trapped, unable to breathe, waiting. The handle of the door twitched, just barely. I didn't hesitate. I jumped up, yanked the rifle up, and aimed it at the door. "I have a gun," I yelled, my voice breaking the silence like a gunshot. Everything went still. Then, footsteps fast, retreating. Something running back into the woods. I didn't chase. I didn't want to know what it was. I stayed awake until dawn, my back pressed against the wall, rifle in my hands. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my things. I didn't even eat. I didn't even check outside. I just threw everything in my truck and left. As I drove down that dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin stood there, quiet, unchanged, like nothing had ever happened. But something had. I don't know who or what was out there, and I don't want to know. I never went back. I don't even know why I agreed to go in the first place. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't scared of the woods like I used to be as a kid. Either way, I regretted it the moment I stepped out of my truck and felt the cold mountain air cut through my jacket. The cabin sat at the edge of a thick tree line, its wooden exterior darkened with age. The windows were like dead eyes, staring out into the endless forest behind it. It was isolated, too isolated. I had rented the place for the weekend. The listing made it seem cozy, a quiet retreat deep in nature. I wanted quiet. I wanted to get away from work, from people, from everything. The long drive up the winding mountain road had left my nerves frayed, and by the time I arrived, the sun was already beginning to set behind the trees. The whole place was drowning in shadows. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that pressed in on you. No wind through the trees, no chirping birds. Just the low hum of my truck's engine cooling down and my own breathing. I carried my bag up the creaking steps and fumbled with the old key before pushing open the heavy wooden door. The inside smelled like dust and pine. There was a fireplace against the far wall, a couch that looked like it hadn't been sat on in years, and a small kitchen with outdated appliances. A single hallway led to the bedroom and bathroom. Everything felt abandoned, like the last person who stayed here left in a hurry. I shook off the feeling and locked the door behind me. The first night passed uneventfully, though I barely slept. The bed was uncomfortable, the air too still, and every little noise made me flinch. The creak of the wooden walls shifting, the occasional rustling outside. I told myself it was just the woods settling around me. But when I stepped outside the next morning, I noticed something strange. The grass in front of the cabin was flattened, like something had been standing there for hours. I tried to shake it off, probably just an animal, a deer or something, but as I looked around, I noticed the odd silence again.
No birds, no insects.
Just an empty, suffocating stillness. I spent the day hiking the nearby trails, trying to push away the creeping unease. The deeper I went into the woods, the more I felt like I was being watched. Not the normal feeling of being alone in the wild, but something worse. Every so often, I would stop and listen, and I could swear I heard something soft footsteps, the snap of a twig. But every time I turned, there was nothing, just trees stretching endlessly in every direction. By the time I made it back to the cabin, the sky was already turning dark. I locked the door behind me and checked the windows, telling myself I was being paranoid. I turned on the small battery-powered radio I had brought with me, hoping the sound would help. Static. No signal. Of course. The only thing worse than being alone in the woods was feeling alone with something else out there. That night was worse than the first. I barely slept, jumping at every small sound. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to a noise outside. A slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps on gravel. My heart slammed against my ribs. I reached for the flashlight beside my bed, clicking it on and aiming it toward the window. The blinds were closed, but I could feel it. Someone was out there. I stayed frozen, listening. The steps were moving, circling the cabin. Then a soft, rhythmic tapping against the wooden walls, like fingertips tracing along the outside. I held my breath, gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles ached. The tapping stopped, The silence stretched. Then something heavy leaned against the door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Eventually, the weight lifted. More footsteps, slower this time. Then, nothing. I didn't sleep after that. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to open the door and step outside. The air felt different, charged like before a storm. The ground near the cabin was disturbed again, but this time, there were clear imprints. Footsteps. Human. I was done. I packed my bag in minutes, throwing everything into my truck. I didn't care about the rental agreement, didn't care about getting my money back. I just wanted out. I started the truck, my hands shaking. As I backed away from the cabin, I looked up toward the tree line. Something was there, just standing half hidden in the trees. Too far to make out details, but close enough that I knew it was watching me. My stomach turned to ice. I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding down the dirt road, not daring to look back. I never figured out who or what it was. Never went back to find out. But sometimes, even now, when I'm alone at night, I hear it again. The slow, deliberate tapping. And I remember that feeling. The feeling of being watched. Some places aren't meant to be stayed in. Some places don't want you there. I drove deep into the forest, the narrow dirt road stretching endlessly ahead, lined with thick trees that blocked out most of the late afternoon light. The cabin was supposed to be remote, just what I needed. A break from everything. No phone service, no neighbors, just a small wooden structure in the middle of nowhere. The air got colder as I neared my destination. I had found this place online, a rental with decent reviews, mostly from hunters and backpackers. It wasn't fancy, just a one-room cabin with a loft, a tiny kitchen, and a wood stove. Good enough for a weekend alone. I wanted the quiet. I needed it. When I arrived, I parked my truck beside the cabin, stepping out onto the gravel with a crunch. The trees surrounded me like silent watchers, their branches swaying lightly in the wind. The cabin itself looked older than in the pictures. The wood was dark with age, the windows a little foggy. A small porch wrapped around the front, a single rocking chair resting against the wall. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of old wood and dust filled my nose. The floor creaked under my boots. A quick look around showed everything as expected. A couch, a small wooden table with 2 chairs, a kitchenette with an ancient fridge, a sink, and a 2-burner stove. A ladder led up to the loft where the bed was. A single window on the back wall looked out into more trees. I set my bag down and checked my phone. No signal. I had expected that, but it still made me feel isolated in a way I hadn't fully prepared for. Still, I had a good supply of food, a few books, and my rifle. The plan was to unwind, clear my head. Just me and the woods. As the sun dipped lower, I started a fire in the wood stove. The warmth spread quickly, filling the small space with a dry heat. I made a simple meal, eating in the quiet, only the crackling fire breaking the silence. Outside, the forest darkened, shadows stretching across the ground. I sat on the porch for a while after dinner, a beer in my hand. The air was crisp, the sky a deep blue fading into black. I listened to the sounds of the forest, leaves rustling, the occasional distant snap of a branch. Normal sounds, but something about the stillness felt off, like the woods were holding their breath. Around midnight, I climbed up to the loft, sliding under the heavy blankets. The fire downstairs had died down, leaving the cabin dimly lit by the soft glow of embers. The wind picked up outside, making the trees groan. I closed my eyes, letting the fatigue of the day pull me under. Sometime later, I woke up. The room was pitch black, the kind of dark that presses against your eyes even when they're open. At first, I didn't know why I was awake. Then I heard it, A sound outside. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something deliberate. Footsteps on dry leaves. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped. Just silence. Maybe a deer, I told myself. Maybe a raccoon. Still, I reached for my rifle, the weight of it reassuring in my hands. I stayed there, heart pounding, waiting for the sound to return. Didn't. After what felt like an hour, I finally drifted back into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I checked around the cabin. The ground was covered in a thick layer of leaves and pine needles, but near the porch they were disturbed. Footsteps, human, leading from the tree line to the cabin and then back into the woods. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. No other cabins were nearby, no roads, just deep forest. I told myself it had to be a hiker, someone lost maybe, but why come all the way up to my cabin in the middle of the night? Why not call out? Knock? I spent the day exploring the area, hiking a few miles out. I wanted to clear my head, convince myself I was overreacting. But even out in the open, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. I kept the rifle next to me, my ears tuned to every sound. Hours passed. The wind howled outside, branches scraping against the cabin walls. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. They stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, gripping the rifle so tight my hands ached. The door didn't move.
No knock.
No sound at all now. Then, after what felt like forever, the footsteps retreated, fading back into the woods. I barely slept after that. The first light, I packed my things and got the hell out of there. As I pulled onto the dirt road, I caught one last look at the cabin in my rearview mirror. A dark shape stood at the tree line, half hidden behind a trunk. Watching, I didn't stop, didn't slow down. I drove until I hit the highway, until I saw other cars, other people. I never went back, never even checked the reviews again. Whatever was out there in those woods, I didn't want to know. The road leading up to the cabin was rough, the kind that hadn't been maintained in years. The rental car's tires crunched over loose gravel and dirt as I followed the directions on my phone. No signal. Of course, that was expected. The deeper I drove into the woods, the more isolated I felt. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches thick and bare, even though it wasn't quite winter yet. A pale, overcast sky stretched above, the kind that made the world feel muted. The cabin came into view suddenly, standing alone in a small clearing. It was smaller than I expected, just one floor, a slanted roof, and a wraparound porch. The wood looked old but sturdy, the kind of place built decades ago and left mostly untouched. There were no other cabins nearby, just trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. I cut the engine and sat in silence for a moment, listening to the stillness. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just an unnatural quiet. I shook off the unease, grabbed my bag, and climbed out. The air was colder here, damp, heavy with the scent of earth and pine. The door was unlocked, as the host had told me it would be. Inside, it was basic: a couch, a fireplace, a small kitchen. A single bedroom with a bed that looked comfortable enough.
No TV, no Wi-Fi.
Just a radio on the kitchen counter. I set my bag down, rubbing my arms against the chill. I was here to get away. From work, from the noise, from everything. A week of silence, reading, hiking. That was the plan. That first night, I fell asleep early, wrapped in layers of blankets. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and thick. I woke up once, unsure why. The room was pitch black. I reached for my phone, but the battery had died. I swore I had charged it before bed. Morning came, gray and cold. I made coffee on the tiny stove and stepped onto the porch. The trees stood still, motionless. It was too quiet. I told myself I was just used to the constant noise of the city. I spent the day hiking, sticking to the paths. There was something unsettling about the forest. I felt watched, though every time I turned, there was nothing. Just trees. Still, silent trees. I shook it off and kept moving. That night, I woke up again. A noise. Not loud, but something. I held my breath, straining to hear. A soft creak. From the porch. I stayed still, my pulse hammering. Maybe an animal? A raccoon? A fox? Something small. But the sound had been steady, almost careful. I waited. Nothing. Just silence. Morning came and I checked outside. Nothing was disturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I spent the day inside, reading, keeping the fire going. The third night, I woke again. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Slow, deliberate steps. On the porch. I lay frozen, barely breathing. The sound moved, shifting from the front of the cabin to the side. Then to the back. Then silence. I didn't sleep after that. Morning felt like a relief. I checked again. Nothing. No footprints in the dirt. No signs of anything. I needed to leave. The problem was my car wouldn't start. The battery was dead. I popped the hood, but I had no idea what I was looking at. The engine was fine yesterday. It didn't make sense. I grabbed my bag, packed what I could, and started walking. The nearest town was miles away, but I'd rather walk than spend another night there. The woods were silent as I moved. My footsteps were the only sound. I kept my pace steady, forcing myself not to turn back. Then, maybe an hour into my walk, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Not mine. Someone else's. They led from the trees, merging onto the path I was walking. And they were fresh. I stopped, heart pounding. The prints were large, heavier than mine. I looked ahead. The path curved, disappearing into the dense forest. I turned, and there, standing farther back on the trail, was a man. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching me. I couldn't see his face. He wore a hood, his hands shoved into his pockets. I turned and walked faster. My breath came hard, my legs burned. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I could hear him following me. I don't know why I ever thought going up there alone was a good idea. The cabin belonged to my uncle. He bought it decades ago, deep in the woods of northern Montana, when he was still young enough to believe isolation was freedom. When he died, it sat abandoned. No one in the family wanted it. It was too far from town, too remote, too quiet. But when I needed a break from everything, work, my ex, the city, I thought, why not? It would just be for a couple of weeks. A reset. Getting there was an ordeal. The nearest town was an hour away, and after that, it was nothing but dirt roads and overgrown paths. The truck struggled on the last stretch, bouncing over rocks and dipping into ruts. The trees pressed in closer the deeper I went. By the time I reached the clearing, the cabin looked smaller than I remembered, like the woods had been swallowing it inch by inch. The first couple of days were uneventful, peaceful even. I spent the mornings chopping wood, the afternoons reading on the small porch. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi. The quiet was dense, pressing, but I told myself I liked it. Then, on the third night, I heard something outside. At first, it was just a faint rustling. An animal, probably. I told myself that over and over, but it didn't stop. It moved, circling. Something was out there, pacing just beyond the treeline. I stayed inside, listening. Eventually, the noise stopped. I forced myself to sleep, telling myself I'd imagined it. The next morning, I found tracks in the dirt around the cabin. Not deer or anything I recognized. Too large, too deep. I decided I was being paranoid. I had brought a rifle with me just in case. Stayed by the door now. That night, the noise returned. Louder, closer, heavy footsteps, circling the cabin, stopping, starting again. Something brushing against the walls. I turned off the lantern and sat in the dark, heart pounding. Then silence, the kind that felt unnatural. The next day, I walked the perimeter of the cabin. More tracks, but something else, 2 long scratches in the wood near the windows. I tried to laugh it off. A bear, maybe. The thought settled me enough to stay. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I wasn't going to let the woods spook me. But the nights kept getting worse. The noises came earlier, lasted longer. The pacing became more deliberate. One night, something pressed against the door, just for a second. A test. I sat with the rifle, breath shallow, waiting. Then, the footsteps retreated. I started sleeping during the day, staying awake at night. I kept the fire low. I barely moved. My food supplies shrank. I had planned to leave in a few days anyway. I told myself I'd wait it out. Then, on the final night, something changed. The noises didn't start with the usual rustling. This time, it was footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, coming straight for the door. Then, a slow, deliberate knock. I froze. A second knock. Then silence. I didn't breathe. Minutes passed. An hour. Nothing. I forced myself to move, to look through the window, just for a second. The tracks were gone. The ground, untouched, like no one had ever been there. I left before the sun rose. I didn't pack. I didn't eat. I got in the truck and drove until I saw other people, until the cabin was nothing but a bad memory. I never went back. I remember everything about that night, and I wish I didn't. It started as a plan to get away from everything: work, traffic, people. I had been working long hours, and my mind felt like it was unraveling. I needed silence, something raw and real. So I booked a small off-grid cabin deep in the woods, hours away from the city. The drive was long, stretching past sunset. The road got rougher the closer I got. At some point, it was nothing but dirt and gravel, lined with towering pines that swayed in the wind. There were no streetlights, no signs, just the GPS struggling to keep up. When I finally reached the cabin, it was nearly pitch black. My headlights illuminated the old wooden structure, a single-story place with a front porch and a small fire pit outside. It looked rustic but sturdy. I stepped out, stretching my legs, breathing in the crisp air. No cars, no distant hum of a city, just trees, wind, and the soft creak of the cabin as it settled in the cold. I unlocked the door, pushing it open with a groan. Inside was basic, just a bed, a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a small kitchen with a propane stove. A single lantern sat on the counter, next to a note from the owner. No power, no signal. Use the lantern. Keep the fire going at night. That last sentence stuck with me. Felt less like advice and more like a warning. I shook it off and set my bags down. The silence was thick, wrapping around me. I liked it at first. I lit the lantern, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. The place smelled like pine and old wood, not unpleasant but unfamiliar. After unpacking, I decided to check outside. The trees loomed taller in the dark. The sky was black, no stars, just clouds drifting. The wind had picked up. It rustled through the branches, creating strange whispers. I walked to the fire pit, kicking at the damp ashes. Someone had been here recently. That's when I noticed something. A single footprint in the dirt, near the trees. Fresh. I stood there for a while, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was from the owner, maybe another guest. But something felt off. It was just one print, no others leading to or from it. I shook off the unease and went back inside, locking the door behind me. The first few hours were peaceful. I read by lantern light, listening to the crackle of the fire. Eventually, fatigue settled in, and I climbed into bed. The cabin was cold, the blankets rough but warm. I drifted off quickly, letting the silence pull me under. I woke up to a sound. It was subtle, barely there. A soft tap, then another. I lay still, listening. My heartbeat thudded in my ears.
Top, top.
Like fingertips against glass. The window. I turned my head slowly. The window was just a few feet away, the curtains drawn. I stared, waiting, my breath shallow. The tapping stopped. The wind howled outside, shaking the trees. I told myself it was just a branch, nothing more. Then I heard footsteps, slow, crunching in the dirt outside the cabin. My stomach dropped. I sat up, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped. The silence was louder than the wind. I reached for the lantern, gripping it tight. My fingers trembled. Minutes passed. Nothing. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Just the woods playing tricks. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there, watching. I barely slept after that. Every sound made me flinch. By morning, exhaustion sat heavy in my bones. The sky was overcast, gray and dull. I stepped outside, scanning the ground. The footprint from the night before was still there, but now there were more, leading from the tree line to my window. I stared at them for a long time, each one pressed deep into the damp earth. Human, barefoot. I packed my things fast. My hands were shaking, adrenaline surging. I didn't care about breakfast. I didn't care about anything except leaving. I threw my bags in the car and turned the key. The engine sputtered but didn't start. Panic climbed up my throat. I tried again. The car refused. It was working fine yesterday. My hands felt clumsy as I checked my phone. No signal. Of course, I forced myself to breathe. The nearest town was miles away. Walking wasn't an option, not yet. I needed to think. I went back inside and locked the door. The fire had gone out overnight, and the cold had seeped in. I sat by the window, watching, waiting. Hours passed. The forest remained still. No movement, no sound beyond the wind. I told myself it was fine, that I was overreacting. I just needed to wait until someone drove by. But nobody came. By afternoon, hunger gnawed at me. I forced myself to eat something small, but my stomach was twisted in knots. I kept glancing at the window. Then, as the sun started dipping, I saw it, a figure standing between the trees. Far enough to be shadowed, close enough that I could make out the shape. Tall, thin, motionless. I froze. My breath hitched. The figure didn't move, just stood there, facing the cabin. Watching, I swallowed hard. My skin prickled. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. Without a sound, it stepped back, fading into the trees. I waited for it to reappear. Didn't. That night, I barricaded the door with the table and chairs. I kept the fire burning. Sleep was impossible. Every sound made my pulse jump. Sometime past midnight, I heard it again.
Top, top.
A slow, deliberate knock. Not at the door, at the window. I didn't move, didn't breathe.
Top, top.
Then silence. I stayed awake until dawn. The second the sun rose, I grabbed my bags and sprinted to the car. I turned the key. This time, the engine roared to life. Relief flooded me so hard I almost cried. I didn't look back as I drove away. Couldn't. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, my heart racing. Hours later, when I finally got back to civilization, I pulled into a gas station. shaking. I looked at my car in the daylight, something I hadn't done before speeding off. There were handprints on the windows, smudged, greasy marks, too many to count. I never went back, never told anyone the full story, but I know what I saw, and I know without a doubt that I was never alone in that cabin. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. A week alone in a remote cabin, deep in the woods of northern Montana. No distractions, no people, just me and the quiet solitude I had been craving. Life had been weighing on me heavily. Work, bills, the exhaustion of everyday life. I needed a break, and this cabin, recommended by a friend, seemed perfect. It took me nearly 6 hours of driving to get there. The last 2 spent on unpaved roads that twisted through dense forest. My truck rattled over loose gravel as I followed the GPS, my signal flickering in and out. Finally, I saw the small wooden structure emerge from the trees. It was simple, a single-story cabin with a wraparound porch. A water pump stood to the side, and there was a firewood stack against the outer wall. No electricity, no running water, just how I wanted it. The sun was already dipping behind the trees when I parked and stretched my legs. I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped onto the porch, feeling the wood creak under my boots. The key was exactly where the owner had said it would be, taped beneath the welcome mat. Inside, the cabin was even smaller than I expected. A wood stove, a small kitchen area, a single bed with a thick wool blanket, a table and 2 chairs. That was it. Simple, isolated, perfect. I spent the first evening settling in, chopping some wood for the stove, filling a jug at the pump. It was quiet, too quiet maybe. I wasn't used to it. Back home, even in the dead of night, I could hear cars in the distance, people moving around in their houses. But here, the silence pressed against me. That night, I slept lightly, waking at every small sound. A branch cracking, the wind shifting through the trees, the creak of the wooden walls as they settled. It was just the forest, I told myself. Just the natural sounds of being alone out here. The next morning, I walked down to the small lake about a half-mile from the cabin. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue with streaks of white clouds. I spent most of the day fishing, catching a few small trout that I cooked over the stove that evening. As the sun set, the trees cast long shadows over the ground, and a strange unease settled in my chest. Couldn't place it. That night, I woke up to a sound outside. It was faint, almost unnoticeable at first. A soft shuffling. I held my breath, listening. It wasn't the wind. It was something moving, something slow. I sat up in bed, the blankets pooled around my waist. My hunting rifle leaned against the wall, but I hesitated to reach for it. Instead, I listened. The sound stopped. I exhaled slowly, convincing myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon. Morning came, and I searched around the cabin, looking for any sign of what had been there. Nothing. No tracks in the dirt.
No disturbed grass.
Maybe I had imagined it. I pushed the thought away and spent the day exploring. The deeper I went into the woods, the more I felt like I was being watched. I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, but I was alone. That night, I bolted the cabin door, something I hadn't done the first 2 nights. I didn't know why I suddenly felt so paranoid, but I wasn't going to ignore it. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I'd wake up feeling like something was just outside, waiting. The next day, I decided to head back to my truck and drive into town. It was a long trip, but I figured a break would clear my head. When I reached the spot where I had parked, my stomach dropped. The driver's side door was open, not just unlocked, wide open. I knew without a doubt that I had locked it. I always did. I rushed to check inside. My glove compartment was open, my papers scattered across the passenger seat. My backpack was gone. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I had never felt before. Someone had been here. Someone had gone through my truck. But why? What were they looking for? I checked the ignition. The keys were still in my pocket, and the truck started without issue. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I drove into town, bought more supplies, and sat in the truck for nearly an hour, debating whether to go back to the cabin. A part of me wanted to leave right then, just drive home and forget the whole thing. But the other part, the stubborn part, didn't want to run away over some paranoia. That night, I stayed awake, my rifle across my lap. Around midnight, I heard it again. The shuffling, closer this time. I held my breath, gripping the rifle tight. Then, a soft, deliberate knock on the door. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The knock came again, slow and steady. Not urgent, not friendly, just patient. I stayed frozen. No way was I opening that door. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I strained my ears, listening for footsteps, for anything, but the woods were dead quiet. I sat like that for hours, until the first light of dawn crept through the window. When I finally worked up the nerve to step outside, there was nothing there.
No footprints.
No signs that anyone had been standing outside my door. But I knew someone had been there. I left that morning. I didn't pack up, didn't even bother locking the cabin. I just grabbed my rifle and my keys and drove. I didn't stop until I was hours away. I never went back. Months later, I found out the cabin had been abandoned for years. The owner, the one who had given me the key, had died a decade ago. And no one should have known I was there.